Thank you for joining us for today's panel, which will be a conversation very kind of Dr. Anna Lovecchio, who comes over from NTU CCA. She's a curator there, and she's been actually working really hard with the artists, talking to them. She's come over a few times to look at their works as well. So I am really excited to have her join us for tonight's conversation. And of course, I think everybody knows these are the two wonderful artists, Sunaina and Hélène, who are here, and they've, I think, done a few tours of the works and spoken to quite a number of you. And we are really excited because most of the works in this space are actually being shown for the very, very first time. And it's been really amazing and moving collaboration working with the artists to see how we can develop these works and push it. And also we've had like tremendous reception from people over the last few days. We had, I think, maybe more than 250 people come for our opening reception. And the feedback has been awesome so far. So we're very excited to have the artists speak in person about the process, the thinking behind the works. And I think Anna will ask like the best questions. Yes, that's why I was asked like, why as the curator am I not moderating it? But I think it's really important to bring in a different perspective because I worked really closely with the artists to put up the show, and we really want the conversation to expand and bring in new layers and insight. And there's no better person here, okay? Just a shout out as well to NTU CCA people, especially Dr. Karen, who can't be with us tonight because she's traveling, because they have been amazing in supporting us in developing this program here at Art Outreach and helping us like think through how we would like to do it, whether it's at CCA or over here, and how the conversation might go, and sitting down to look through the artists' works, not just for today's exhibition, but their practice over the years. So I think this is going to be like amazing. Thank you for joining us, and over to Anna.
Thank you, Michelle. So it's also my turn to thank Michelle for giving me this wonderful opportunity to familiarize myself with the work of these two inspiring artists who I was not very familiar with until we had this 1 week of a couple of weeks actually of multiple conversation, and I got to know their practice, and then something started to happen and things started to click, and their works started to talk to each other in a very interesting way. And I think the purpose of this talk is really to maybe have them share again with you what's the processes and the ideas that are behind these beautiful works that we see so quietly hanging around us. The title of the show is not quiet, it's actually quite violent. The show is titled What Does Not Kill You, and that's a slightly threatening entry point, but I think we will see that kind of danger or violence or trauma is something that is present basically in all of these works. It's the background stories that we're going to hear from the artists. So both Sunaina and Hélène are not, they've been living in Singapore for many years, but they did not study art in Singapore. They studied elsewhere in India and Japan to some extent, Sunaina, and in France, Hélène. But then somehow their practice bloomed here, which is also something I would like to touch upon later on, because it's not so easy for non-Singaporean artists to cultivate a practice in this country for reasons that maybe we can discuss later if you're not already aware of them. But I'd like to start maybe by asking each one of you to give a short introduction to your practice and how you ended up at this point.
Good evening, everyone. So just to give you general knowledge about my practice, I'm particularly interested in exploring the relationship between the human body and the memory it contains. My practice can be quite versatile in the sense that I move from painting to sculpture to photography to installation, videos. So for me, changing the medium is a way to look at my subject through a slightly different angle, to express something slightly different each time, but always related to this idea of how our environment and our memories shape also who we are, and how we deal with the dichotomy that exists between the materiality of our existence as we go through life in a very embodied manner with a very strong physicality involved, but at the end, the memory that stays is totally unphysical, immaterial, so it's something very intangible. So I'm quite interested in this relation between materiality and immateriality, in a way.
Hi, thank you for coming, everyone. My practice actually comes from a very personal space. I also talk about the body, but in a slightly different way. I talk about the body from the angle of trauma and healing. It comes from a personal space of being a breast cancer survivor and the caregiver to my daughter who's a type 1 diabetic. So for me, the needle, the violence of the needle and the beauty of the needle, the difference between a medical needle and an embroidery needle, for example, is a very interesting concept that I explore. I use a lot of thread, embroidery, some photography, some installation in my work, but mostly I like to work with textiles. And in this particular body, this exhibition, I've done something quite radically different that I've been working on for the past 10, 15 years, because it's about moving from the reality of trauma when you're dealing with something that's very, very serious you're talking about. Earlier on, my work was very black and white. It was harsh. I was embroidering on my own mammogram images, ultrasound images. There was a lot of pain that I wanted to express. But now, I think after 10, 15 years of dealing with it, there is also part of the fact that I've grown older, and there's a lot of acceptance that comes from that. There's also a lot of relief that's come because I've been cancer-free for 10 years. My daughter's grown up, and that comes from a place where there is a positive approach. So there's always going to be pain. The idea is that there's always going to be trauma, but how you deal with it going further really makes a big difference to the outlook. Therefore, from my palette being totally black and white, it comes down to something very colorful, something very hopeful, something very playful, which is what you'll see in this exhibition.
Yes, and I think one of the early works maybe that Sunaina is referring to is Synapse that is hanging there, and that's still the kind of achromatic, very sparse aesthetic presence, and maybe you can describe how it's made and how it came about. But I just want to say that the way it's installed in the show, it made me think a bit of a birth canal. This idea of having to traverse a space that is where there's pain involved in this transition, in this passage, is something that I thought it was quite meaningful and beautiful to have people, usher people into the space through this kind of work. And also, I'd like to mention that this is also the space where Sunaina had the first solo show.
Yes, without outreach.
Yes, and Louis, correct? No, was it not you?
Yes, it was him.
Oh. Yes, and
that was 5 years ago. So for the show that I did with him, it was the 5-year mark, which was actually a more important mark for a cancer survivor. And actually, he's the culprit. He made me really look into something that I did not want to look at. He really pushed me to look at something that is more serious. And he pushed me to look at myself rather than my daughter's body. Because it's like, we are both female bodies, but as a patient and a caregiver, you're talking about it from an entirely different lens. So for Synapse, I'm just going back to Synapse. This is the title of this installation is Synapse, which is actually the space between two neurons in the brain, where the impulse actually gives you the information that travels in the brain. So for me, on one side, I have put a whole lot of dressmaker pins, which are sharp, violent objects. And it also alludes to the trauma of needles, injections, everything that's got to do with healing the body. And on the other side, we've got gauze bandages, which talks about the covering up of the pain, the healing, the bandages that then help the wound recover. And the whole idea, like she said, is that you have to walk through this. And the pain and the healing is cyclical, it's there all the time, and it's inescapable. It's one of those things, which is why it's always at the entrance. And this installation I've done many times in different spaces. It's always site-specific, so the idea is always to walk through these two, pain and relief at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, and thinking of that kind of pain, maybe Hélène, you wanna share about La Disparition, the series that we see on this wall, and one image is also at the entrance.
Yes, so this series of photos is the fruit of a collaboration with the mechanobiology researcher and me. Basically, this field, his field of research is to study if environment influence our cell's behavior. To do so, he creates artificial environments that he produces by 3D printing polymers, and all those polymers have property to disappear under certain circumstances. For example, when they are submerged into water, and I take submerge, I use the word submerge on purpose, because it's also how we can feel emotionally under certain circumstances. We can feel totally submerged. So, as I was telling you earlier, I'm quite interested in the materiality versus the immateriality of our existence and our relationship with memory. And I told this researcher that I wanted to work on the idea of disappearance, how something material suddenly become immaterial, and this process of disappearing, or materiality dissolving. So he was quite excited and invited me to collaborate with him and to produce some artworks using the lab facilities and the lab techniques. So what I did is I 3D scanned the sculpture of a head that I've done for a previous installation. From this 3D scan, I 3D printed a smaller version of that head that you can see here, using the polymer this researcher is using to document cells' behavior and how they behave, depending on their environment. And what you can see on those pictures is the disappearance or the dissolution of one of those heads. So as you can see, there is a very strong relationship with landscape also. If there is a form of landscape in this, for me, it's a way, I like to see the body as a territory to explore inside, outside, and I'm particularly interested also in exploring this relationship and this thin boundary between inside and outside. So I like to use landscape as a possible representation also of our inner world. And I decided to print those photos on, there are proper prints on photographic paper, but then it's encapsulated in acrylic. And I chose this acrylic mount process because I think it looks very shiny and very smooth and neat, and I think it reflects very much also how we interact with others, how we present us to the world. Like we all try to present ourselves in what we hope to be a shiny and smooth and neat manner. But we all know that inside we all carry much more complexity, and we also carry sometimes emotional explosions or like difficult things or much more things that we not necessarily share with others. So that's also what this series is about.
Yeah, I think so. What I think is starting to emerge already is that both Hélène and Sunaina work a lot with the body, either with the physicality of the body or with the experience of living, the mediation, of living through the body, not just in our heads. And yet we never see throughout the whole show any figurative representation of the body. One of the common languages that they share is abstraction. And yet their works, I think, have this kind of warm, this kind of visceral, almost quality to it that speak very nicely to each other. And when I first saw the series, Hélène showed it to me. It was on the computer. It was not printed yet. And I had this moment of estrangement. I thought these were, we are just contemporary eyes. I thought this would be some kind of AI-generated landscape, but it seemed very alien to me, very artificial, very none of this earth. And then when she explained the process, it is actually very physical. It's a physical small statuette, basically melting in front of our eyes. I was quite taken away by this idea, and by also the very strong emotional impact of the work. And so I think from the synapses to the head, our heads melting in this sea of who knows what, mystery or discomfort or something that destabilizes. Another work that engages very deeply with our minds is the one behind me, Reconstruct by Sunaina, which is also based on drawings, neural drawings.
Yeah. So basically these are neuroscientific drawings that were created in the 19th century by a scientist who was studying the human body, and he did the first drawings of the human body and the neural pathways. So for me that was very interesting, because it's like the information channels that go between the mind and the body, and how you feel the pain and you feel joy, you feel sorrow, all through these neural pathways of nerves endings and all the other things that happen inside the body, so to speak. So I created these drawings. They are basically on handmade paper. I've done these drawings. And then there is a second layer of fabric. It's organza silk fabric, on which I have done embroidery with suture needles, as well as regular embroidery threads. And again, I'm talking about the suture needles because the needle per se is both beautiful and scary at the same time. So for me also, the space between the paper and the fabric is about the space between the mind and the body, the space between where you decide whether to take, your mind is controlling your body or the other way around. And it's the space in between also that is very important. And that's what I've shown. So there are some where the scars are old, some are new, some are yellow on yellow, so you can see that they're old, or they are fresh. It's just a cycle that just continues. Yeah.
And do you want to mention also about the color, the yellow? Where does the
Yes.
yellow come
Oh, yeah.
from? Because that's quite
yellow.
important as well.
Yeah, the yellow comes from turmeric, which is a healing spice in Indian food. I mean, turmeric is a very common spice, and it actually has healing properties. So for me, the yellow is very attractive as just a part of constant healing is what we all need, and that's why it's very important in this particular body of work.
Yeah, so in a way, I think this bodies of work brings together a couple of your interests, which are, of course, I don't know if medicine is an interest. It's become, had to become an interest because of, all the treatments and they had to go through, but also then you discovered or reapproached Ayurvedic medicine, so, non-Western type of ways of thinking about the body and the kind of balances in the body. So the turmeric is one of those healing herbs that are used in other types of medicines, and that you've been trying to bring together, which I think is quite interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Because Ayurveda was something actually that I did have to study, because when I say study, I mean I had to just look it up and try and use it for healing for myself as well as my daughter. Because when you've got chronic illnesses, yes, you have the medicines, but there are side effects to those medicines. Then nutrition becomes extremely important. So it's like trying to understand what food does to your body, what spices does. And it's very interesting because I'm Indian and I've grown up with these spices. I know that there are certain healing spices, but till my daughter and I didn't get sick, I didn't look at it. So now if you ask me, it used to be like, the old wives' tales. It's like my mother said, have turmeric in milk, it's good for you. And that was it. I mean, you can't argue with them, right? It's like, I told you to have it, just have it. But now to understand what it actually does and to read about it becomes even more interesting, because you can actually understand what this particular herb or spice does to your body. And therefore it becomes that much more interesting, and then you can use it in the purpose that it's needed to be used. So it became a kind of a parallel study that I've been doing over the years to just understand how the body works and how it can be healed without Western medicine, because you have to do both. You can't do one without the other.
So when I first started to, look up their works and hearing them talking about it, one of the things that came to my mind was a text by Virginia Woolf. It's a short essay that she wrote, titled "On Being Ill," which she published in the 20s, and she wrote after being hospitalized herself for a nervous breakdown. And in that, with a lot of irony, in that text, she tackles the insufficiency of language to give words to this kind of state, so to some states of our body. And she says English is such a, it's a grand language with a long history. We can express the dilemma of Hamlet or the tragedy of Macbeth, but when we fall in love, we have centuries of poetry and literature that can lend us the words to express the feelings, but when we fall sick, language falls short of words. And and basically one of our main points is that there is, in our culture, at least, of course she's speaking from the Anglo-Saxon point of view, the mind, there is this dichotomy, Cartesian dichotomy between the body and the mind. The mind is very adept and coming up with words to describe some states, but the body sometimes is insufficient to explain and to voice what's happening in our body or what's done to our body. And I think language, this kind of insufficiency of language is present in all of your works, and then I think it comes out very strongly with Hélène's work, the one that is kind of hidden at the back, which I don't know if you had time to read, but she collected a series of words, and I just read a few of them. So it starts like Je me souviens, which in French means
I remember.
And then smashed, shattered, obliterated, disintegrated, atomized, devastated, unbearable, demolished. A few more words on this side, and then it ends with le corps du silence.
The body of silence, yeah.
Which means the body of silence. So here we have language, and yet.
So I see this artwork a bit as a response to this series, and I will be back just for a minute to the series before I elaborate for this artwork, because with what you said about AI, I think there is also a broader spectrum to understand this work or to question ourselves about this work and about the process. Because despite what I said about materiality and what we carry inside and outside, I think under this age where the human body can nearly be reproduced industrially, totally or partially, it questions very much also a certain form of humanity, and also is a certain form of humanity is going to disappear in front of this technology, and which are also here to heal us and to improve medicine's techniques. But at the same time, it's very also, it poses, I think, a lot of questions about our relationship to the body and the way it's going to evolve in the future. That said, to be back to this idea of language, part of my practice also involves writing in many ways. Very often in an unconstructed, I deconstruct writing in an unreadable form, but sometimes also I use it in a readable form, like in these artworks. In any ways, I think in both ways, what the reason why I involve language is because I think it fails very often to express the complexity of our human experience. I think sometimes words are not strong enough or not precise enough, and also because we are in a constant move, like in 2 seconds we won't be the exact same than 2 seconds ago. So it's also in a constant change. So even if we use certain vocabulary or certain words to express how we feel. It may not be true in 2 minutes. So I think, language is something quite complex. It has beauty into it, and I think it carries in itself also, and we discussed about that to prepare the talk with Anna. There is a strong, of course, poetics in language, but poetics, I think, is very much about expressing what is in between, what can be said, what can be represented, all what escape, what we really can name. Like the poetics experience is very much about what poets do, basically. They try to, with words, they try to create something that can be expressed easily, and that they try to picture this kind of intangible part of existence through their poetry. In this piece of, in this artwork, so I was telling you, I see it a bit as a response to this series, because this series was very complex, as I explained to you, to produce. It involved a lot of technology and a lot of quite elaborate technique. And I wanted these artworks in response to be very modest, extremely simple. I wanted it to be as simple as possible. And so it's just paper that I embroidered with words. So if you, I don't know if you had the time to look at it from close, but it's many small papers. Entry point is written in French, so with this repetitive I remember, white on white, so very neutral. And the exit point also is in French, saying le corps du silence, the body of silence, repeatedly as well. And it was, so I'm French. French is, of course, emotionally very close to me. So I wanted, through this work, to express this idea of unspoken truths we carry within ourselves, all those things and events or stories that we carry within ourselves that are very difficult to name or express. And especially difficult to express when it's expressed in a language that is emotionally very close to you. So in between the entry point and the exit point, I decided, I selected, as you read, so many English adjectives that all relate to this idea of disappearance in a way or another. They all relate to this idea of explosion, destruction, and violence. They are more confrontant also in terms of colors, because I decided to use tones, pink and red, that refers to me very much as flesh and blood. So very related to the body as well. And they are all expressed in English, which create for me like a kind of safe distance to approach certain emotional state for me. So that's the idea behind it. And just to end quickly, also using embroidery for me is a way to talk about transmission, because embroidery used to be known as a more feminine craft that was also transmitted from mothers to daughters. So it has also something to do with this idea of repeating the story and maybe repeating the trauma sometimes. And also, like for Sunaina, embroidery, of course, refers definitely to this act of mending, of repairing, of suturing. And if you look carefully, those adjectives words, English adjectives represented in the artworks, they are slightly, sometimes the letter is slightly unbalanced. So even if it's an attempt to repair what happened, even if the repair has been done, there is still something, a bit of the line, something unbalanced, something discomforting in some ways. And in some others, the stitches are removing themselves, with this idea also of how sometimes when we re-explore certain harsh memories, the wound is reopening. So yes, it's what it is about, yeah.
I think it's also important to highlight that the last panel, when you said le corps du silence, the body of silence, is when we encounter the body. The word body is actually spelled out. And it also starts to make sense of the show, but also connect very much to the work that is at the entrance, that now has been the sound work, that I think now is being switched off to allow us to talk. And maybe we can mention that very briefly, because that's a very important key also as important as the birth canal to enter the show.
So this soundtrack is it's a loop. So there is a very regular rhythm, like something clapping somewhere, and there is a young lady's voice whispering constantly the same sentence, which says, "What are you doing with my body?" This is a soundtrack that I produced some years back to accompany a happening that I was invited to do in Bangkok. This happening was supposed to question very much the status of the female body. Is it like in human body in general as well? But is it sacred? Is it profane? Is it, what can we do with it? Like how people interact with this body of ours in many ways, positive and negative, but both ways. And when Sunaina introduced me to her installation, I very quickly was attracted to also present this soundtrack. I think it made sense in the sense that this soundtrack, I hope you will have a chance to listen to it after the talk. It's a bit like, it's something very obsessive in a way, like I suppose how you can feel under chronic pain, but at the same time, after a little while, because it's so regular, it can pass a bit unnoticed. It's something you have to live with. It's here somewhere in the background, but after a little while, you can get used to it and you live with it, no matter what. So I think it made sense, but at the same time, if you listen carefully, the voice of this young lady is slightly off the track, slightly unbalanced with the rhythm sometimes, not all the times, creating also this sense of discomfort at the same time, yeah.
Thank you. And Sunaina, would you like to share also your relationship with embroidery? Because that's a technique that you are using a lot and appears in a couple of works. I mean, the one that we just discussed, and then maybe we can move to growth as well. But also in general, what does embroidery mean for you?
Oh, wow. So that's a very wide topic. But for me, embroidery started as something very basic. I've never been trained as an embroiderer. For me, it was just something that I used to do. And like I said, it was the needle and the beauty of creating something out of something that's really painful. So I started using embroidery in my works maybe about 7, 8, 9 years ago, somewhere there. And I've done a lot of these series of works, but the ones that were really more important for me were the ones that I did which I did with the show with Louis 5 years ago, which was embroidering on my own mammograms. So that was actually a turning point in why I was using embroidery in my work. From something like Helen said, it's very domestic, it's very beautiful, it's a feminine craft, but for me, it became a way of dealing with the violence that is done to the body. And again, like I'm talking about being a patient and a caregiver, my body was dealing with that violence, but I was also doing that violence to my daughter, because I was injecting her, I was poking her, so I was experiencing it and making her experience it as well. So for me, that embroidery became so multi-dimensional. It became so important to talk about it. And then while I was actually embroidering, it was also soothing. It was helping, it was cathartic for me. It was helping me forget about the trauma for a bit. And then it just became part of my practice. And for this body of work, it became about, like I said, the beauty of the embroidery threads along with the suture threads. So the violence and the soothing is side by side. And then I moved on to these new works, which actually have excited me a lot more, because I started working with the sewing machine, which is again something I'm terrified of. I was never trained in it. So it was like, again, the needle, but in a semi-automatic way, because the machine is a machine, but I'm using it as literally a drawing tool. And what I did was, in this series, I've created a series of embroidered works where I'm using water-soluble cloth. And that cloth actually it's like the base with which I start drawing with the needle, and basically the minute you immerse it in water, the only thing that's left is the thread. So it was almost like dealing with the second skin that I was creating to cover the hurt. I'm still using the needle, it's still very violent. In fact, it's more violent than it's ever been, but it's creating something beautiful. It's helping me create a second skin over the memories of the violence that I have been subjected to and I have subjected my daughter to. So for me, this series is more moving towards the acceptance and the positivity of the trauma, which is going to always remain there. So now, like I said, for my body, I'm 10 years cancer-free, but every time I have to go, of course, the usual blood tests, everything, that's still going to be there. But for my daughter, it's always going to be there because there's no cure for type 1 diabetes. So for her, it's just a way of life. And that's why I'm just looking towards the second skin. In fact, the skin, something that I haven't mentioned to you before, Anna, is that the skin for her is already scarred because she's literally looking for different parts of her body to pierce because there's only so much skin that you can use. But the amount of trauma that she has to be dealing with is something that's always going to be pervasive. So for me, it becomes a very, very personal journey. And therefore, I'm always looking to look towards the positive side of something that is so all-pervasive in my personal life. Yeah. So the needles become extremely important again.
So that we are basically looking at the handmade embroidery and then machine-made embroidery. I think the technique you use is called freehand.
Yes, free motion embroidery. I use like an embroidery hoop on the fabric, and then I literally move it. So it's almost like I'm drawing with the needle. I can show you guys videos later. If you have some videos, I can show you. So once I've finished the drawing, then I immerse it in water, and whatever's left is only the thread. So I have to loop it carefully enough so that I'm like weaving with a needle instead of drawing. You know, it's like a weaving that I'm doing with the needle.
Yes, and so second skin is part of this maybe new phase in your body or work, where after all the darkness and the pain, you expressed in your heart, you're now trying to visualize, focusing maybe more on the resilience. Yes. Of the body and the regeneration properties.
Exactly, because like I said, in each of these bodies of work, because a period of time has passed, there is a certain acceptance that comes with long-term trauma. You just kind of accept that beyond this point, this is what it's like. So you're going to have your good days and you're going to have your bad days, and you're just going to continue like that, and the body will deteriorate. Obviously, we are all going to age, we are all going to have to deal with the pain and the relief. And then therefore, it's about the mind over body. And like I said, from this body of work, which was done 3 years ago, to moving to a part where, now 10 years cancer-free, my daughter's grown up, she's an adult, I don't have to panic so much, it's like, okay, now let's look forward to the positivity of being human, literally being human, and enjoying that part of being human that frees you, to do things that you want to do, and not just focus on the physicality of the body, which is aging anyway, so just move on with it.
And the other very new body of work that you're presenting in this show is inspired again from science, specifically from stem cells.
Yeah. So actually both these bodies of work, they're two separate bodies of work that I'm inspired by. Again, I'm looking at just the organic growth that there is within the body, outside in nature. And I wanted to just look at it from a very light-hearted, very positive lens, a little playful. I wanted them to look fresh, healthy growth cells. So some of these cells, they look like cells, but they also look like growth that you would find in nature. You would find these like coral growths. And just the act of creating this is also very cathartic, because they're literally little buds that I see as growth. And eventually it will envelop a space. It should be experiential. So those are the works that I've created in that installation. And similarly, should I just move to this one? because they are kind of connected. And in this installation, what I've done is I've taken my gauze bandages and I've dyed them in red dye, and then I've broken the gauze bandage into fiber again. So again, going back to literally the building blocks of fabric, and I've encased it in resin and created these cell-like structures which remind me of fresh blood, fresh stem cells, fresh growth, which eventually should envelop the space. And again, moving towards positivity and growth in the body and outside. Yeah.
And just for those who don't know, stem cells are those very special cells in the body that have the capacity to replicate themselves, either as identical cells, or also they can differentiate themselves. So they have very, very strong regenerative properties that are being studied a lot because they can really make big progress in healing a lot of diseases. And so this body that is sometimes not upright, sometimes is not so straight or walking so well, is also, for me at least, evoked by Hélène's work at the entrance, which has a very, in a way, geographical title that we might maybe talk about later. It's called Here, Somewhere, Totally Else. So it's a lot about almost space, and it's that kind of tapestry of images that we see at the entrance.
Yes, so this installation is made with the support of Fujifilm, and I created it by taking many instant photographs of skin and fragment of the female body. But they are all photographs of skin and body, so it's a bit distanced from the real body itself. My intention was very much to explore how, under certain circumstances, especially traumatic ones or difficult events that happen in our lives, we tend to dissociate. We tend to be out of our own body, which become a kind of abstraction in itself. Like we can't relate to that body under this specific time. So in that sense, this installation can be seen a bit as an attempt to reassemble all those abstractions together in a form that has its own organization, a way to organize. And I think, like over our conversations with Anna, she mentioned that there is a very strong sense of grit in my work, which is very true. It's true in the embroidery, the way we put it, and this is very true also in this installation. And I think it's a kind of it poses the question also of why us artists are making art. And on my side, I think it's also a way to reorganize or to control something that was not possible to control in some occasions. So it's probably also a way to reattach, reassemble, reorganizing, and trying to piece things together and trying to make sense in a way. So yes, so that's what it is. Yeah.
And I think those two works, the ones here, the embroideries on the wall and that floating tapestry of images, are really talk to each other a lot, because I mean, the images there are are images of destruction, disintegration, or fragmentation of the body that is described in the embroideries, but somehow you put them together in this kind of floating, not necessarily anchored space.
Yes, and interestingly, today someone asked me why it was floating this way, why I presented it this way, and actually one of the answers is that when you are under those harsh circumstances, and when you disconnect with your own body to protect yourself in a way, you're not grounded anymore. You're just somewhere else. You're just floating somewhere. You don't know where, but you're floating somewhere. So I think it has also something to do with that. And at the same time, because also I think in this show we explore very much the dual forces between resilience and suffering or pain, it's also a way to give it more lightness and having this idea of floating anyway, also in a sweet way, not only in a harsh way. Yeah.
And I think we talked a lot about the search for lightness and softness, and that means a lot to you.
Yes, it means a lot to me, and I think, like in the past, it was even the subject of one of my solo shows, this idea of exploring the territory of softness in regards with femininity as well. And I think I feel the urge of also once more taking this statement and of softness and the side of softness or gentleness, I don't know how you want to call it, but I think it's particularly important under a time where all debates are so polarized and so extreme in many ways, and I think softness doesn't mean weakness. I think gentleness and softness carries a lot of power within itself. There is even a philosopher, Anne Dufour-Montel, who wrote about that, and she wrote a beautiful essay called The Power of Gentleness. It's a very powerful text, and I think it's also an act of resistance in a way, especially under these times that are so harsh and crazy, I feel, especially in the West at the moment. It's quite scary. So I think there is really an urge, and it's an act of resistance. It's even a political choice, I feel, to be on that side. And I think it's not easy, but I think it's quite important, and there is also a beauty into it, because when you choose to stand on the side of softness, it means also that you arrive to that point where you're reconciled. I mean, there is a sense of reconciliation between what happened in the story and where you stand now, and that's okay, and you can move forward. So I think there is this sense also of trying to once more making peace and piece things together with what happened with where we stand now. Yeah, and I think it's a strong act of resistance.
Yes, and this kind of existential approach to life and to bodies that maybe have undergone trauma or violence, and the constant labor of piecing together and reconstructing also what happens in the mural, which is I think the last work we have not talked about yet.
Yes, so there is an ongoing mural here, and by the way, you are all invited to join me in the coming days if you want to paint with me for a little while. I decided to work also on that mural because I was more interested in the process than in the mural itself. So it's evolving every day. It's called What Are You Doing With My Body, in reference with the soundtrack we mentioned earlier. And the idea was to invite the audience to participate, questioning, of course, the appropriation also of the female body. So in the end, this mural will look like a fragment of a female body that is totally pixelized. So also with the idea of same, it's a bit like dual. There is this idea of reorganizing with this grid, but at the same time there is also a kind of blurriness in the effect we will reach, and also a kind of distortion in a way. So there are both those dual forces involved into it, I think.
So I think I think we touched about all the works, and I would like now just to ask you more broad questions about your artistic practice and the spaces that you create for yourself, because as we said, you're not you've been living in Singapore for many years, but you're not originally from here. You're also mothers, both of you. So how do you carve out this space for the art practice in a foreign country, and with the family obligations and responsibilities that you have?
Okay, so for me, that was the biggest challenge. Being an artist is not easy at the best of times, but if you are a parent, if you're a mother, and especially for me when I've got a situation where my daughter's health is also the issue, it becomes very challenging. So on a domestic front, that's why I have a studio at home, which actually helped a lot, because if I can create at odd hours, I can work at night, I can work early in the morning. All that really helped. But also, I think the biggest challenge being an artist is not easy at the best of times, but if you are a parent, if you're a mother, and especially for me when I've got a situation where my daughter's health is also the issue, it becomes very challenging. So on a domestic front, that's why I have a studio at home, which actually helped a lot, because if I can create at odd hours, I can work early in the morning. All that really helped. that was one of the biggest challenges actually, was to find the time to create and the energy to create to really. So it's taken me a long time to develop my practice, which would have become much easier had it been a normal art practice, because it's literally about devoting the time. So actually, whether it was a conscious choice or an unconscious choice, I can't really be very sure. But the objects that I decided to work on, the way I started working, even embroidery, for example, it became a very natural choice of a way of expressing myself. Also because it helped with the domestic situation I was dealing with. I could sit with my daughter and embroider while she was eating dinner, for example. It's just one of those things that you have to navigate. And these are things that actually are looked down upon, right, by the art fraternity. It's like, okay, you're not a serious artist simply because you're sitting and working when your daughter is doing something with you. So that was a bit of a challenge. It was about being taken seriously as an artist, so there were two problems. One was the time that I needed to devote to actually create, and the second was to be taken seriously just simply because the work itself was very rooted in domesticity, rooted in femininity. It was rooted in all these labels that unfortunately the art world has. And in Singapore, again, being an outsider, though I don't understand what that means anymore, because I've been here 22 years, I've been here for most of my adult life. But it is a challenge here because, I mean, for obvious reasons, I'm not from here, but I am from here. This is home for me. So that is also a bit of a challenge, because to show your work is hard, which is why spaces like this are fantastic, because it gives you a platform to actually show your work and to reach out to an audience. And specifically for my work, I find that because I have all these very personal stories, in the past 5 years, the shows that I've done, actually the two main shows, like I was saying, the 5-year-old show and this show, the interaction with the audience is also extremely important, because there were plenty of people who walked into the show which was talking about breast cancer, and I wanted to interact about something that is so serious in a space that is neutral. So an art space is not dangerous, it's not scary, it's not medical, it's not a hospital. So it allowed for conversations to happen which would not normally happen. People shared their experiences about breast cancer. There were people, young girls who walked in and said that they had had it. They talked about their mothers, they talked about their sisters. Men interacted with me. And I think that was a conversation that is very important. So I think that being in Singapore has been easy and hard at the same time as an artist, and as a woman and a mother. That has been the hardest, but which is why I think you see the difference in my palette, where suddenly I'm like, okay, I'm at that space where I can actually devote more time to create what I'm doing and take it to another level and move forward with that.
You said it takes 2 hours to do about 3 square centimeters of those works that are hanging on the work. That's just to convey how labor intensive these works are.
Yeah, so actually I've chosen it like that. So, which is why when I have actual studio time, I'm in my studio producing something like that. But when I don't have studio time, I actually do 2 parallel works at a time. I do something which I can sit and watch TV with my kids, and I can sit and do that while they're watching TV. So there are 2 bodies. So this kind of organza fabric I can do outside of the studio, and that I need physical space to do a studio. And that is a navigation that you have to, as a woman and mother, you have to navigate that, because it's not easy to say, okay, fine, I'm just going to be in my studio for 6 hours. It never works like that. I mean, real life never works like that.
So I have a bit of a different journey on my side, but I started to make art in my 20s, right after my graduation in Paris. I did 1 year, 1 full-time year of painting. I had a first show in Paris at that time, but then I got really scared to walk along this artistic path. So I just hung up my brushes, and I have not produced anything personal for 20 years. During that time, I worked as a designer, so I think I kept from those design years this very, very versatile practice, working with different materials. Yeah, I think it comes from this. the reason I got scared was because I thought I was putting myself at risk, or my balance at risk. I was 20 something, but very, very young. I probably didn't feel that I could keep control also on what I was producing. It was asking me to go very deep inside myself, and I didn't feel very safe doing that at that time. But also part of the story is that I really wanted to have a family, and I thought I had this very strong feeling that this practice of mine could eat me alive, and didn't give me enough time or enough chance to grow a family in also a healthy and nice environment. So during those 20 years, it's not that I covered the practice and that I didn't want, I prevented myself to produce things that I wanted to produce. I never had the intention to go back into art, actually, for 20 years. And interestingly, after my fourth child was born, which we made with this intention to be the last one. So I think unconsciously there is a lock probably in my brain that opened up suddenly. And I was in Singapore at that time. So interestingly for me, Singapore is really the place that also where I reopened fully the door to my own practice. Interestingly, it arrived very suddenly, like once more during those 20 years, I never thought about taking back my practice. I never wanted to paint or whatever. And suddenly I was caught with this very strong will and desire to paint again. And well, I have a lot to say about it, but to make it short, I think the connection with Asia also probably brought something into, because when I restart to work, I was very decided to start back exactly where I stopped. So I was already exploring this idea of body and memory and traces, everything lived in our life, and so on. And I was working with Chinese ink at that time when I was in Paris, because I've been trained in fresco painting. And there are so many connections, interestingly, between fresco painting, like the Italian Renaissance technique, and Chinese ink, in the sense that there is a very short time frame to work. And you can't erase, you can't correct what you've done, so the first stroke must be the good one. So for me, very naturally, I moved from this fresco training and specialty of mine to Chinese ink. And I think probably, and I was very attracted, that's one of my source of inspiration from my young years. I got caught by the very late work of, and sorry for my pronunciation, because my Chinese is not very, very good, with the ink, the late work of Zhao Wuqi, and especially at the very end of his career, as you may know, he embraced what was really his roots by working on very large format with ink. And it happened that in my young years, I went in the second-hand bookshop and I found this book, and I was totally overwhelmed by this work. So I think there is no, I mean, I don't know if that's providence or what it is, but it's just like I reopened this door here with this very strong connection with Asia that I was carrying within myself for a very long time. Yes, and to be back to what you were saying, in my slide, I solved the problem of family matters and my practice by having a studio quite far from home, intentionally. So it's a bit, I was telling Anna, it's a bit of a schizophrenic life, but I have to say that also it's a way for me to, I think, as I told you, like territory is involved in my work. Territory is also very involved in my practice in the way that my studio is my own territory. It has to do with very intimate stories. I have a practice that is quite introspective, and I think it's good that it's put this way, like it's far from home. I have a kind of distance to drive to land back in my mother's shoes when I'm back home. So, and I also have time to be out of my mother's shoes and face myself when I'm in my studio. So that's the way I found to solve the problem.
Okay, so first of all, thank you to Anna. I think that she was masterful. She brought us really through the show. You know, it was a really tour through all the works while we were sitting here. And I think we moved also from the exhibition space to the artist studios and living room. So please join me in a round of applause for Anna. I think she did amazing job. You know, we spoke about all the works. We moved through the artist parts, and we really moved through, you know, thinking about where they're going as well. So thank you so much, Anna. And of course, to the artists, the work speaks for themselves. I think thank you so much also for opening your hearts and sharing. I think a lot of it was not easy, and having known both of them for a while, I know that to come to this point where they can speak so clearly about what they want to say in the context around their works. I think another big round of applause. Thank you. Yeah. I also want to give a shout out to the people who supported us really quickly at the end, okay? Of course, Art Outreach has been amazing. NTU CCA made this conversation possible. I think that thank you so much. I know how resources are, how time is. So for Anna, come here, spend the evening, plus like yesterday evening, opening night evening, and also sitting down for an afternoon. Thank you so much, you know. We have also volunteers. I mean, Ashley, Verson, you know, other students, you know, again, who came to help out as well. Thank you so much, because a lot of these works were made possible. Of course, sponsors. I have to give sponsors a shout out as well. We had support from NAC Toad Fund. Okay, we had support as well from Fujifilm. And I also want to say this is exciting for us. I've started an advisory, Linguistics, okay? And this project is the first project in our Faceted Women in the Arts initiative. And that has been also generously supported by BV Initiatives for the next 5 years. And it's really important for us to have that seed funding to support projects, especially for women in the arts, not necessarily just about women artists. You know, it could be like male curators working about women artists, lots and lots of different things, okay? And hopefully not curated by me necessarily, so we're looking for proposals, but I think that having that little space in a changing world is like really important to know we have that to anchor us in the next 5 years or so. So thank you very much for joining us, and we hope for more in the coming months.